Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, for this video right here, I want to talk about these NFL protests. I want to talk about that guy, Ray Lewis, and Kaepernick. You know, recently Donald Trump called NFL players who protest during the national anthem, he called them sons of bitches. And in response to that, you had a lot of teams unite and engage in protest during the playing of the national anthem. You had some who kneeled, some who held arms and stood during the national anthem as a sign of solidarity. So you have widespread protests. Like, for instance, you had the Baltimore Ravens and the Jaguars playing a game over in London. And during that game, most of the players kneeled in protest. And then you had other teams like, for instance, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who decided not to come out on the field during the playing of the national anthem as a sign of protest. And you had other teams, and even some of the owners have participated in these protests. Now, the protests involving the Baltimore Ravens, you even had Ray Lewis, someone who has criticized Colin Kaepernick for engaging in the protest. He even kneeled during the demonstration. And I'm going to go into him a little bit later because he denies that he was participating in the protest. So, as I see these protests taking on, more teams being involved in them, more people participating in them, it becoming more mainstream. I think that the protests have lost their purpose. No longer is it about police brutality. No longer is that the core message. No longer is it militant. No longer is it a real protest about real issues. Instead, it has degenerated into a discussion about Donald Trump, into a protest over what Donald Trump had said. And that's not what it was meant to be. That's not why Colin Kaepernick protests. So you have everything being misdirected. You have it being diluted. And this whole thing reminds me of Brother Malcolm X. He gave a powerful speech entitled The Message to the Grassroots. It's a great book that includes many of his speeches and it's titled Malcolm X Speaks. And in that book, it includes that speech in particular. And he talks about the March on Washington. He talked about how it became co opted, it was taken over, it became diluted, and it didn't have its same militancy, the original militancy that was intended by the grassroots. Like, the people in the grassroots wanted to rise up against Washington. They wanted to march on the White House, march on the Congress, the Senate, and the representatives, and all that stuff to demand equality, to demand equal rights, a militant voice. They were talking about shutting down the runways to the airports and all that kind of stuff, according to Malcolm X's account of the situation. And then later on, it got took over by these rich white people, and they worked with the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. But he gives an analogy in that speech. He talks about how he compared that original protest to a cup of coffee. He talked about how it was too black, which meant that it was too strong. So what they did is they integrated with cream. So instead of it being something that was hot, it became cool. Instead of being something that wakes people up, it puts them to sleep. And that's what we see with this whole protest, going on right now. It used to be about the police brutality. It was a genuine movement from the heart. And now all of that stuff is forgotten. Now it's all a circus. It's all a play. It's something that everybody's involved in, all these different people who don't even care nothing about police brutality. You had the same owners that blacklisted and blackballed Colin Kaepernick for participating in the protest. All of a sudden, these people got a conscience and they're in the demonstrations too. If they really cared about the issues, then they would hire that brother Colin Kaepernick instead of keeping him out of the NFL, instead of blacklisting and blackballing him. And I think that, I just think it's a whole hypocritical thing, these owners pretending like they care about the rights of players while at the same time they're denying this brother Colin Kaepernick an opportunity to play. I think that's the most hypocritical thing ever. And I just hope people aren't lulled into sleep, back to sleep, thinking, well, oh, these guys are protesting, so they care about Colin Kaepernick and they care about the issues now. I just hope people don't buy into that and then start to continue to watch these games. I think the boycott should continue. The boycott should continue until they hire that brother Colin Kaepernick. That brother put everything on the line, sacrificed everything for the people, sacrificed millions of dollars for the people. The least we could do is sacrifice watching the game. So, yeah, I mean, what you have with these recent protests is a dilution of the coffee, making it weak, making something that was hot, cold, making something that was designed to wake people up into something designed to lull people back to sleep and lull people back into watching the NFL games and all that other foolishness. And the fact that you would have a coon like Ray Lewis participate in these demonstrations tells you just how watered down and diluted it has become. And this guy faces some problems of his own. I mean, it's another prime example of the tragic coon. Because this guy, he kneeled, during the playing of the national anthem during that game in London, and he's come under fire for that. People are calling for the removal of his statue because of that. And in response to, criticism that he's faced, he said, well, I wasn't protesting. I wasn't participating in a protest. I was kneeling. I was praying at the time because he did have both of his knees on the ground. Basically, it amounts to him saying, boss, I didn't mean any trouble. I wasn't trying to anger you, boss. I wasn't participating in those Negroes' protests, boss, massa. I was just praying, massa. Don't do me wrong, massa. That's his attitude right now. That's how he looks right now. He looks pathetic. And those people that are calling for the removal of his statue, I can't stand those redneck people, man. Those racist bastards, man. Calling for the removal of somebody's statue simply because they perceive them as participating in a protest. I have no respect for those people. But, as far as removing his statue, I have no problem with that because a coon like that doesn't deserve to be honored and respected. Somebody that's that weak of a man, somebody that's that submissive and obedient, such a good, loyal coon slave, they're not worthy of that kind of respect. So I have no problem with his statue being removed. I'm sad to say it, but I do. That's the way I feel, man. And then you have this whole issue with the Sports Illustrated. I mean, they're trying to write this brother Colin Kaepernick out of history. I mean, there would be no talk about athletes protesting in these times if it wasn't for this brother. But here you have Sports Illustrated trying to erase this brother from history, even though he's the most significant protest athlete at this particular time in history. They omitted him and they included all these other miscellaneous people that don't have half of the heart of this brother, don't have half of the courage of this brother, didn't take half the stands and have the action that this brother has taken. And yet they're going to feature these people on the magazine. I mean, this is disrespectful to the legacy of the struggle. It's disrespectful to black people. It is just another example of people trying to whitewash history, trying to dilute and weaken an original movement. And it's just a shame, man. I can't support that. I have to call it out. I mean, we see this time and time again where our history is diluted, where people are omitted from our history. And it's like these people are basically trying to define reality, trying to shape reality with their imagery. I mean, it's like history. I mean, like how certain figures in African American history were written out of history, and we had to learn about these people well after our high school years, well into college. We're finally learning something about our history. And this is just another prime example of this. I mean, if these people had their way, they would erase Colin Kaepernick from history. And we can't allow that, man. And my point is this, man. We need to remain vigilant. I encourage every single person out there to stop supporting the NFL. Stop watching those games. Stop purchasing those tickets. Stop purchasing those products. Just quit supporting the NFL until they do right by this brother Colin Kaepernick, until they do right by all the players and allow people to voice their opinions about the issues that matter today. Here you have the Baltimore Ravens. You know, these people acting like they're down with the cause now when they denied this brother Colin Kaepernick an opportunity to play. That's a disgrace, especially coming from a city like Baltimore where we had a horrific case of police brutality involving the death of Freddie Gray in a predominantly black city. You mean to tell me that they can't support this brother Colin Kaepernick? They can't pick this brother up and now they want to pretend like they're down with the cause? Man, the hell with that. Tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.